How's it going, everybody? Welcome back. This is Neon White. We went through a little bit of a rebranding, but it's a name that I use for a lot of other things. I'm also really into video games, as well as card games and Magic and whatnot. So it seemed a bit easier for me to sort of condense what I was using and just kind of keep it all the same and everything else. Today, we are going to be talking about the commanders that I'm most excited for coming out of Aetherdrift. I'm recording this just a couple of days before Aetherdrift pre-release. I'm extremely excited to be participating in that. Pre-release is one of my absolute favorite Magic events to do, and I'm really excited. Aetherdrift is a little complicated for me because I don't entirely vibe with the theme of the set and the racing and everything, but at the same time, there are some really, really, really cool cards in this set that I'm excited to get the experience to play with. So, one announcement before we really get into this. I am going to try to have a more consistent upload schedule. I know it's been a while. Life's been a little complicated. I mean, things ain't been easy. But I'm going to try to have a more consistent upload schedule. On top of that, I just said how much I like video games and whatnot too. I'm going to try to stream video games on this channel at least once, if not twice a week. They likely, almost definitely won't have dedicated videos. This is going to be a dedicated Magic the Gathering, pretty much exclusively Commander channel. But I will just also be streaming video games here on the side as a way to kind of share that and add a little bit more to something that I already enjoy very much. So, with all of that being said, I'm glad to be back. And let's get in here and let's talk about these commanders that I'm excited to see out of Aetherdrift. The first is Ketramose, the New Dawn. It's one of the new gods that were replacing the gods that died on Amonkhet. So, we got us a brand new god, and both of the new gods in the set are extremely powerful. Now, Ketramose the New Dawn costs 1 black, 1 white, and a generic for a 4/4 with Menace, Lifelink, and Indestructible. So, 3 mana for a 4/4 with all those keywords, that's already an extremely good rate. But it does more. Ketramose can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile. It's good that it has some sort of requirement to be able to attack or block, because if you could just outright, get that much value for 3 mana just off the keywords with no downside whatsoever, this card would be more busted than it already is, because it is extremely strong. And then it says, whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from graveyards and or the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So, now, anytime any cards are put into exile during your turn, you get to draw a card. You have the downside of losing a life, but a life for a card is not bad. Especially when you start to realize the synergies that this can have. So, let's get into that. So, Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile are already probably the 2 strongest removal spells in white. The fact that it's 1 mana, instant speed, exile it, and they're either getting some land or some life. Either way, you use this to take out the biggest threat on the board at instant speed for 1 mana. That's already an extremely great card. That's why these see play in basically every single deck that's white. So, now you add on the fact that if your commander is out and you play a Swords to Plowshares on something, not only are you still getting the great rate of removal that Swords to Plowshares offers you by default, but now you're also going to cantrip on top of that and draw a card. So, it just adds that much more value to your exile-based removal. So having exile-based removal in your deck is really the kind of removal you want to run the most of. Things where you can exile things and just get that extra value from drawing cards. There's a lot of destroy-based removal, especially having black as one of your colors. But definitely try to run all the exile-based removal you can when you build this deck to get the most value out of your commander and to be able to get those cards to get them into exile and leave them in exile so that you can actually start attacking and blocking with your commander and gaining some life. Next, we want to fill it with good enter the battlefield effects, and this will make more sense in a minute. So you look at things like Angel of Despair, which destroys a target permanent when it enters, or Noxious Gearhulk, that destroys a creature and gains you some life when it enters, or Ravenous Chupacabra, that just kills something when it enters. Those are really good enter the battlefield effects that'll kind of help you control the board. And you can look at other enter the battlefield effects too that may gain you life or draw you cards or, recur something back to the battlefield, things along those lines. Like enter the battlefield effects, you want just solid enter the battlefield effects in this deck in general. And that's because another great way to take advantage of your commander outside of the obvious being, with the exile-based removal. Oh, well, I'll put Panharmonicon, double up on your enter the battlefield effects. It's really a must include. But you want to be able to flicker things. And the way that white flickers things is it exiles things. So, this is actually colorless. It's a 5-mana artifact, Conjurer's Closet. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So now whenever you have these good, efficient enter the battlefield effects, you're going to be able to take advantage of those effects multiple times, get lots of value out of it, and draw cards at the same time. So it's just adding a piece of card draw on top of every single thing that you flicker, which is extremely powerful. Then you look at things like Flicker of Fate, which is just instant speed. So you can do it on other people's turns if you need to, but you only get that draw effect if you do it on your turn. But it's still a 2-mana, repeat one of my really, really good enter the battlefield effects and draw a card. And then, of course, one of the best flicker effects ever, Ephemerate. It'll let you do it, you do it on your turn, then during your next turn, you do it again. You're repeating this enter the battlefield removal, the gaining life, the drawing cards, just getting a ton of value out of this. And your commander's indestructible, so it's going to be harder to remove, even just sitting there. There is exile-based removal and things like that are going to be out there in other people's decks and things like that. But having indestructible, and I've learned this especially playing commander in my playgroup, if something has indestructible, it is a lot harder to remove because most efficient removal or most removal that sees play is destroy, not exile. So your commander is going to be able to stick around. You're going to be able to get just endless amounts of value off of it. It's really, really strong. A lot of people think might be like the strongest commander that's going to be out there, or one of the strongest. I definitely like it. I do think it's extremely powerful. And it's probably the commander that I'm the third most excited about. There's definitely one that sticks above all of them for me, and we'll get to that. So the next thing we're going to talk about is Daretti Rocketeer Engineer. It's a mono-red artifact commander. So for 1 red and 4 generic, you get a star 5. Its power is equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control, and whenever it enters or attacks, choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return the chosen card to the battlefield. So, basically, what is it, Goblin Engineer that does this, or Goblin Welder? I think it's Goblin Engineer. You can tap it and sack an artifact and get an artifact back out of your graveyard, basically swapping the positions of those and everything. So, basically, what you want to do is you want to be able to deploy smaller, value artifacts and things like that, and get bigger artifacts into your graveyard to be able to attack or have him enter the battlefield and swap their positions, to be able to get to be able to basically cheat your bigger, more powerful artifacts into play. So these aren't cards that I put on this little list, but things like Faithless Looting, Cathartic Reunion, looting type effects, where you'll draw cards and you'll want to be pitching your big, powerful artifacts. So I put Scrap Mastery in because that's just an obvious include in any sort of red artifact deck, allowing you to basically get all your artifacts back out of your graveyard. So if you end up filling your graveyard up with a bunch of big, powerful artifacts, and you want to just be able to cheat them all into play instantly, that's something you can really easily do with Scrap Mastery. So smaller value artifacts that you would want to play and then sacrifice and then possibly recur later. Something like Mycosynth Wellspring, which is a 2-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So it'll go through, get you some lands, help you make sure you hit your land drops every single turn, thin your deck a little bit. It's really, really good value when you play it on turn 2, go get something, and then eventually sack it to recur something huge, and then possibly bring it back later. Ichor Wellspring, 2-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield or is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card, so you're going to get value off of this when you play it and when you sack it to cheat something out. Then you have big targets like Mirror Battlesphere, big 7-mana artifact to be able to cheat this into play. It makes a bunch of mirror whenever it enters. And then you start looking at things like what would be good targets for Daretti outside of these small, like little 2-mana value artifacts or mana rocks and things like that. And that would be artifact tokens. We're talking mirror and treasure and, things like that, clues. Make these artifact tokens. And Mirror Battlesphere basically says, hey, here's 4 1/1s that you can sacrifice to get other strong things back, or even some of your other smaller value pieces back, and things like that. And then we got things like Portal to Phyrexia. Imagine you play a couple of 2-mana rocks to ramp up to your commander on turn 4, or turn 3, turn 4. You drop your commander, and then as soon as he enters the battlefield, you put a Portal to Phyrexia into play. Gives you a huge advantage. Or you can just use it to get back some big value piece like Chromatic Ori. There are definitely really, really great targets for Daretti that you can put in with looting effects and other things like that. You can easily get into your graveyard. He's going to be a target for removal himself because his ability is so strong. But that's okay, because with mono red, especially if you build the deck in an efficient way to ramp really quickly with like mana rocks and things like that, you can get him out really, really quick. You could do extra combats to be able to, go ahead and swing, give him haste. That way you get 2 activations the turn he comes out. You almost don't even care if he gets removed, if you can play him and swing with him the turn you play him, and then cheat in like a Portal to Phyrexia and a Cage Stun or something like that, Panharmonicon is another include in this, as well as Conjurer's Closet, because they were really, really good in Ketramose. They're also really, really good in Daretti, doubling up the enter the battlefield effect of Daretti and the enter the battlefield effects of the artifacts that you want to be cheating into play and whatnot, as well as being able to repeat his effect every single turn, or even twice a turn if you're swinging with him every turn. With Conjurer's Closet, just makes him extremely efficient. Gamble, something I didn't think about, but that I didn't show a picture of here, but Gamble is actually a really, really solid tutor in this deck, because you can go tutor up some big artifact or something like that. If it stays in your hand, cool. If it doesn't, you discard it. That's also fine too. Then you can just cheat it into play. It's definitely going to be a really, really solid deck. I think it's going to be one of the more fun decks. I don't know that it'll necessarily be as strong as something like Ketramose, because Daretti will be easier to remove, but I definitely think it'll be a lot of fun. And finally, my most exciting commander is Sab-Sunen Luxa Embodied. This is the new Simic God. It's 1 blue, 1 green, 3 generic for a 6/6 with reach, trample, and indestructible. Gotta have the keywords. Sab-Sunen can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it. And then at the beginning of your first main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on Sab-Sunen. Then if it has an odd number of counters on it, draw 2 cards. So let me tell you how easy it is to be able to draw the 2 cards and swing with this every turn, on top of it being on an indestructible body with reach and trample. So the value you're going to get off of this is absolutely insane and really, really exciting. So being an indestructible god means it's going to be a little bit harder to remove, which totally plays into your advantage. But the mechanic proliferate makes this thing absolutely disgusting. So we look at things like Azuri, Stalker of Fears, that says whenever you proliferate, you draw a card. Proliferating is something you want to be able to do in this deck a lot. And then whenever it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 if you do proliferate twice. So say you get to your first turn with it, and you put that 1/1 counter on it at the beginning of your main phase. You draw the 2 cards. The downside is supposed to be, well, I can't swing with it this turn. Well, now if you proliferate, you can move it up on a 1 counter, and now it has an even number of counters on it, and you're able to swing with it then. And now, your very next turn, when you add that counter to it, you'll draw the 2 cards, and then all of a sudden you're drawing the 2 cards, making your creature huge and swinging with it every single turn. So then we're also running things like Tezzeret's Gambit that will draw you some cards and proliferate. Evolution Sage, allowing you to proliferate every single time you play a land. You want to put some other proliferate synergies in here too. These are just the first 3 that came to my mind, but you can also run things like the land Karn's Bastion, just to be able to make sure that you can get it to an even number of counters every single turn to be able to swing with it. Next, I want to be able to untap and have instant speed answers up. Because you're going to be drawing 2 extra cards every turn, you're going to be drawing a total of 3 cards minimum a turn once your commander is out, and you're able to proliferate everything else. You want to be able to take full advantage of that in every way. So obviously, with this being green, some of your mana ramp is going to be dorks, like Llanowar, Elves, Elvish Mystic, Birds of Paradise, things like that, along with like your traditional 2 mana rocks like Arcane Signet, Simic Signet, things like that. So having Unstoppable Plan will untap you some creatures every single turn, and it'll allow you to have mana up for instant speed answers and whatnot. Same thing with like Seedborn Muse, allowing you to untap all the time, and this actually combos with some other cards that I'll be showing off here in a minute, to be able to get just a ton of value out of untapping and being able to do things at instant speed, on top of taking full advantage of your turn with the crazy amount of card advantage that you're going to be getting. Some of that is like Counterspell or other Counterspell. So like I have Counterspell here, just traditional 2 blue instant speed counter target spell. Something you can take full advantage of your turn, then untap, and you'll be able to have so many answers in your hand that you can stop the biggest threats to your commander and sort of use these counterspells to be able to protect your commander. Or Cryptic Command, one of what I think is an underrated card, especially when you can have it in a deck like this, allowing you to counter things, return things to their owner's hands, tap creatures your opponents control, draw a card. You choose 2 different modes, you can sort of get some really good value out of this. Next we have Vorl of the Hulklade, which is another card that, if you don't have any proliferate synergies out, or even if you do, if you have Vorl of the Hulklade out, you tap 2 and you tap it, you double the number of counters on your commander, and even if it has an odd number of counters or an even number of counters on it, when you double them, it will always end up being even, so it's another card out there that's going to make your commander go huge and make sure that it can swing. Same thing with Zamone, Paradox Sculptor, which says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures you control. So that alone can add the counter to your commander to make sure that it's at even during combat to be able to swing. And you can also tap it to double the number of counters on 2 target creatures and or artifacts. So Zamone, also extremely powerful in that right, just to be able to make sure that your commander can swing. And these are just small, just a few cards, a small portion of the potential card pool for this deck, saying, hey, every turn you're drawing 2 extra cards, making your commander huge, having cards in your hand to be able to protect your board, and with your commander having trample, getting wins with commander damage in this deck is going to be extremely easy. The amount of value that's just accidentally stapled onto this commander, and the fact that its downside isn't really a downside because it's so easy to play around and actually benefits your deck to play around it, I think easily makes this both a really, really powerful deck and a really, really fun deck to be able to play. And that's why it's the commander I am most excited to build and play with, because just of the different things that you can do with it. Because at the end of the day, your commander is really just a value engine. So you can kind of build it any sort of Simic deck that you want, whether it be ramp or control or counters or, just anything you want it to be. The one thing people, I think, are going to make a mistake on that you do not need to do whatsoever is do not include the normal, traditional double counters effects like Doubling Season, Hardened Scales, Primal Vigor, things like that. Because having those blanket, put twice as many counter effects on your things is a non-bow with your commander, because now whenever you go to put the counters on it at the beginning of your main phase, it will always have an even number of counters on it. So you will never actually get the 2 cards off of it. You'll be able to swing with it every turn, but you will never get those 2 extra card draws. So avoid the traditional +1/+1 counter cards, because they will actively hurt the performance of this deck. And that's crazy to think that there's a +1/+1 counters deck out there that doesn't want, Hardened Scales and Doubling Season. But this is it. You do not want them in this deck because it will turn off half of your commander's ability. So, with that being said, I went over the cards that I'm excited about. Tell me which commanders y'all are excited about. I know people have been freaking out about loot. So, I'm really excited for Aetherdrift. I hope you guys are too. Welcome back. It's good to be back. And I will catch y'all next time. See you around.